both the School of Management and the School of the Environment are really incredible places to be thinking about the issues of sustainable business that we're challenged with right now. So I'd say that I had a few different focus areas. At the School of the Environment, my main focus was on industrial ecology and life cycle assessment. Industrial ecology is a really fancy word for what I would basically describe as like the science of the circular economy. What does it look like for materials to flow through our economy? How can they be used more efficiently? How do we even begin to think about and quantify the way that materials are used? And then, of course, life cycle assessment is how we quantify the environmental impacts of a product or package throughout its life. What are the greenhouse gases associated with a product? What was the water footprint, etc. So those were my focus over there. And then at the School of Management, my focus areas were on like sustainable business strategy. So how do you actually make effective arguments for why companies should be caring about sustainability and how it can be a competitive advantage. I also focused on consumer behavior and how we think about actually nudging consumers to make more sustainable choices. And then I focused on the intersection of regulation and business as far as sustainability is concerned. So did a lot of research on packaging EPR as part of my program. So I really was trying to soak in as much as I possibly could to get ready to be a professional in today's circular economy profession.
It seems like a lot of people like yourself who are so interested in fixing these problems. And when you consider what percentage of the waste problem is packaging related, it's a huge area where that's where the people like yourself should be going, right? I mean, why not? That's where you can make the biggest difference. One of the things that fascinates me about Atlantic is they're they're a little bit more than a packaging company, right? They don't just make packages. They work with a bunch of other packaging companies and their designers and their solution center. Explain that part of the business model because I feel like that's their secret ingredient.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, that was a big selling point to me about working at Atlantic. I would say that many sustainability professionals' biggest fear is winding up in a company where they are basically being asked to greenwash what they're doing and feeling like they have to just promote whatever it is the company is doing because that's their employer. And it is much easier to wind up in that trap if you are with a company that is married to like one thing that they're selling or a couple of SKUs that they're selling. And what is so cool about Atlantic is we are in large part a distributor. So we're not married to any one material. We can be really picky about the companies that we choose to buy from. And for the things that we do make ourselves, we can have a lot of power in our. I mean, we're a small enough company that we can be really nimble. And so there's a lot of power that comes with being a distributor and kind of a mid-sized company that is able to be that nimble. So I know one of Wes's favorite things to say, which I think is absolutely true, is that Atlantic is in the perfect position in the supply chain to be an impartial arbiter of truth about sustainability. We have no skin in the game about which material ultimately wins economically speaking. We have everything on the table as far as what material is going to be healthiest for the planet. And so looking at every application individually and saying what makes the most sense here, who of our strategic partners can we pull in to develop a sustainable solution there, that is part of what I love to do. And then we also have a lot of incentive to optimize packaging for our customers. We thrive in these really long-term relationships with customers where our idea is not to just like pump as much packaging into the customer as possible because that's how we'll make the most money. We will do best when our customers do best, and part of how that happens is through optimizing the customer's packaging to use as little as possible and develop cost savings and reduce damage in transit for as long as possible. And so I think that we've built a lot of credibility with our customers through our ability to optimize their packaging, and then for the packaging that they do have to use, saying how can we develop the use the most sustainable material possible for this application. So I love that in a lot of ways we get to be consultants. I was also a consultant in a former life, so I think I lean into that identity quite a bit. But this is not just a bunch of salespeople. These are ultimately like packaging consultants with engineers on staff and polymer chemists on staff and sustainability experts on staff who want to help customers develop a bespoke sustainability solution.
Yeah, and that to me seems where, like when you look at that California bill, the SB 54, the ambitious bill that California just passed on this whole thing, it seems like it would make perfect sense to lean pretty heavily on the expertise of Atlantic for them as they're, getting into the sausage making of this and really trying to determine how the pro should work. So tell me about the meeting that you guys had, because I know you went out to celebrate the passage of the bill. I know Wes is getting involved. Where are we in the cycle of that bill? The bill's passed. Such a huge, monumental task. It was 4 years in the making. Put it in context, and then talk about the road ahead a little bit.
Yeah, so the California bill was the fourth packaging EPR bill that we've seen passed in the U.S. In last year, in the summer of 2021, Maine and Oregon passed the first bills, and then in summer 2022, Colorado passed a bill, and then California passed its bill practically immediately after. Of course, we celebrate the progress made by all of those states, but it's particularly exciting in California just because of the sheer scale and how large the California economy is. So obviously we were celebrating the passage of the bill, and now we kind of get to turn to the next thing and say, okay, how do we actually do this? And so the producers, meaning brands who use packaging, now need to come together and form what's called a producer responsibility organization. And what is ultimately going to happen is anyone who sells packaging into the state of California is going to have to join the pro and pay the agreed upon rates for packaging that the pro sets. And that's how the pros will raise funds that then go to improving the recycling and composting system. Now, the next huge hurdle is forming the pro and setting that fee schedule. And of course, as you can imagine, the way that that fee schedule is set up is going to have huge implications for what kinds of packaging companies are incentivized to use and how much they're incentivized to reduce. And so we, Atlantic, have a really strong interest in having a seat at the table so that we can help the pro set really intelligent fee structures for packaging, and especially when you start to get into the nitty gritty of issues like, well, how do we incentivize recycled content? To what extent does that make sense? Are there rewards for recyclability over compostability? Like, how does that work? And so we have been trying to understand basically what does it take to get a seat at the table so that we can help inform that process. And I can assure you that there are many companies that are doing exactly the same thing. And so what was neat about getting to celebrate with the folks in California was hearing from the legislators about what their challenges had been in trying to pass the law, so that, so we know that some of the discussions that came up as they were trying to write the bill are going to come up again as we talk about what does the fee structure actually reward. And so it's in our interest and every other producer and brand's interest to understand those issues really well so that we can make sure that we can incentivize sustainable packaging as well as possible. So that next implementation hurdle is going to be really huge. It's not super clear how the pro is going to be formed, but we would love to be a part of that process to whatever extent we can, especially because we will be members of the pro no matter what, because we sell packaging into the state of California. So we really want to be involved.
Yeah, and I mean, it's obviously, I think this is how politics works, right? And this is where the regulations kind of, there's sort of two sides of the coin, right? Like the people who want regulation, sometimes they don't realize that the people who end up writing the regulation legislation are the ones being regulated,
Hmm.
right? And and in large part, that's where a lot of the special interest backroom deals and everything, it's becomes part of that sausage making. So this is where we can lose this thing and can get bastardized if it's not done properly, which is why, I think our job is to really kind of keep an eye on this process and look and follow it closely, because this has worldwide ramifications. California is the fifth largest economy in the world. We get this right, it's a template for the planet, But if we get it wrong, it's a giant black eye, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it's something where, we've talked a little bit about how EPR works in theory. And you're right that my biggest fear is that this crashes and burns in California and then no other state wants to implement EPR. People look to the US and say, well, if they can't do it, none of us can do it. So we really need to get this right. Part of what's good about the fact that the way that the pro is set up is, yes, the pro does determine what their fee schedules are going to be, but the state does have kind of veto authority over that fee schedule, and so it's not as if the pros are getting to set up their governance without any oversight. So that oversight does exist, but I mean, we all know that the pro will get to frame the conversation and put out that initial proposal, and how they do that is going to have huge implications for how this thing ultimately looks. So we want them to put forward a proposal for structures that actually make sense, so that the state can say, yes, this looks good, please proceed.
Now, the intent of the pro is to obviously fund a lot of the waste management, right, within California for this stuff. So I assume that means that we will get a reinvigorated recycling, sort of reinvented recycling system, because a lot of the uh, MRFs over the years have kind of fallen by the wayside. They couldn't be financially supported. Is this sort of recycling 2.0, 3.0? Where are we in this? If you were to put it in historical terms.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think we are headed to recycling 2.0. It is kind of remarkable that MRFs and waste haulers and the packaging industry have had so little interaction and collaboration over the last however many decades. And this is going to be a forcing mechanism for more of that collaboration, because the pro is made up of those of us who are actually making and selling packaging and the brands who are using it for their products. So it will absolutely incentivize what we call design for recyclability, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's getting the brands to say, okay, how do we design this package not only to secure the product and to look beautiful and to be easy for the customer to use, but also how do we design it so that we can recover the material from it at the end of life. So I think we are going to see enhanced collaboration between MRFs and the packaging industry as a result of this bill. And that will help create Recycling 2.0. But we're also, just plainly speaking, going to see a huge capital investment. MRFs have been just underfunded. The collaboration between the private industry that often runs MRFs and the municipalities often doesn't have enough money to upgrade technologies to things like infrared sortation, using AI to sort different materials. I mean, we have some really cool technology out there to improve MRFs, and we need some of the capital to do it, and some of the innovation that just comes from private industry involvement to get everyone talking to each other to improve the MRFs. The other thing that I'm really excited about is that part of the incentive to get Recycling 2.0 off the ground, as you were saying, is that brands have been making some really ambitious pledges to use more recycled content by 2025, 2030, what have you. The problem being that there simply is not enough clean, high quality material coming out of MRFs for these brands to meet their goals. And what I'm hoping is part of the incentive for brands and producers will be that at the end of Recycling 2.0, there will be more clean material for them to use so that they can actually meet their goals. And so it'll hopefully be also cheaper to use recycled content than it is right now. So I absolutely think that if done right, this is how we fund upgraded recycling systems, and also hopefully how we build out more access to composting systems in different states as well.
Yeah, and composting is another huge factor because one of the points you raised in our last conversation, which was something that kind of I wasn't super aware of, but when you're not composting and that stuff is going into the landfill, that food stuff is releasing a lot more methane in the landfill than even the plastic is.
Yeah.
And that methane is just horrible for the as a greenhouse gas, right? So that does seem like something that we also need to step up our game in.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, landfills are a leading contributor to climate change because of how potent methane is as a greenhouse gas. And the main reason that landfills emit methane is because of food waste. And so if we can divert more food waste and the connected food waste packaging into composting rather than landfills, we could see huge reduction in methane.
And one of the other things we touched on about end of use, and it was something that I've just been baffled because there's so many opposing views. I was reading about Japan, and they're obviously a very small country, but highly populated, not a lot of land space, so they end up incinerating a lot of their stuff. And I know talked again in our last conversation, you were saying that incineration is sort of the worst case scenario for plastic stuff. But there's these people out there arguing like, oh, well, these new scrubbers and everything, they can clean this stuff and it's not as bad and whatever. What is your take on those arguments? Because, are new scrubbers highly, a lot more effective than the old ones?
Yeah, it's a great question, and like everything else, there are trade-offs with different sustainability options, and there are clear trade-offs between incinerating something and landfilling something. With incineration, I can't say that I know enough about the scrubbers to be able to say how effective they are. I do feel like I can say with pretty good confidence that we are better at capturing nasty stuff going into the air than we used to be. But it is ultimately just really hard to capture everything. And I guess part of how I guess I'll sum up the differences here is, let's say that a plastic water bottle took or has X amount of embodied carbon in the bottle, meaning that the actual material, it's kind of like how there's calories in food where like once you eat it, you consume those calories and you use those calories for energy. Let's assume that it took like X amount of greenhouse gases embodied in that bottle. And what happens with any piece of material is that when you burn it, you release all of the embodied greenhouse gases of that package, just like you burn the calories as you consume something and then use that energy. The issue here, of course, is that we have too many calories in the atmosphere. There's too much CO2 in the atmosphere. So what happens when you landfill a piece of plastic is that there is so little degradation that occurs in landfills, especially of stable materials like plastics, that the greenhouse gas calories in that water bottle stay there. We call that sequestration. The carbon stays sequestered kind of in the landfill in that bottle. When you burn it, you release all of those calories immediately. And so there's a much more short-term impact of having released the embodied CO2 as well as other nasty stuff in a product when you incinerate it, whereas it's a slower process in a landfill. So you could kind of argue like, well, ultimately, why does the time scale really matter if things are ultimately going to degrade? Like from a climate change perspective, it's going to happen one way or the other, so why do we really care? The short answer is that in the short term, like we have opportunities to curb greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere right now that we absolutely need to take advantage of. And so opportunities for carbon sequestration are kind of important. And I know like reasonable people can disagree about this philosophy, but my philosophy is that if you're going to have a piece of plastic that's going to wind up in either a landfill or an incinerator, for now, I would rather it wind up in a landfill where at least it's sequestering the carbon that it currently has. The complicating factor in that discussion is waste to energy, which is when you incinerate trash and then use the energy to turn it, use the incineration to generate energy. It is still net carbon positive to burn trash and turn it into energy. It's not that it's not much greener than burning coal, oil, gas to make electricity. So I think it's a little bit of a slippery slope to call it like a renewable energy source. I would not go that far. We should definitely be using solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, etc. for our renewable energy. But the kind of accounting and the calculus of what is ultimately better from a greenhouse gas perspective, burning trash for energy or keeping it in a landfill, is complicated, and I can't say that I know enough about it to say which one is ultimately better. The truth of the matter is that both incinerators and landfills are often situated in lower income communities of color. There are environmental justice for both of them. There are environmental harms to both of them. I think there may be times when incineration makes sense as a way to dispose of material, but I think those may be few and far between. Just as an example, I once visited a waste to energy incineration plant in Copenhagen, and part of what they were telling me is that that is where they dispose of currency that is going out of circulation. And that makes the most sense because they would rather do that than landfill it where people might still be able to use it. Like, ultimately, the secure thing that they need to do is burn it. So if they're going to burn it, they may as well turn it into energy. And I think the same thing went with medical waste, that was actually like a pretty good use case for incineration. But as you can see, these are pretty like specific applications where maybe there are things that we don't want winding up in landfills and that can't be recycled. But in terms of just like writ large, taking our trash and burning it, I think it's really short-sighted, and ultimately it's not a sustainable solution. So I know that was a really long answer to your question, but I wanted to get to the nuances of the debate.
No, and I mean that's the part that I'm really kind of trying to dive into because the two sides are, hey, this is waste to energy, and the other side is like, no, it's a waste of energy. It's like, it's still not, and I'm trying to grasp it because I feel like there's even I think it was Sweden or somewhere they were saying they've got incineration plants with very high end scrubbers and it's state of the art technology and stuff like that, but they're still they can't even feed it enough. They're importing waste to feed that thing because they can't even have enough. So it's one of these things where to make them worthwhile. So it's definitely something I'm interested in, and it keeps coming for me. It keeps coming back to like it's kind of like energy. I feel like having all our eggs in one or two baskets is super scary. I think we have to somewhat diversify, and you kind of always have to look at local level, like Japan, a country like that is short of landfill space. I mean, the city of San Francisco, I think it's headlines that were here a week or so ago. It's just like, we're done. We're out of landfill space. We have to go find new stuff. And so that's a fascinating thing. So I appreciate your input on that because it helps me kind of understand where we should go. I think the other thing that's really a little scary and seems like a hurdle to me in terms of this EPR thing is when you look at the special interest and the plastic producers and the fact that a lot of them, I mean, ExxonMobil, let's just say. I was doing some research on ExxonMobil. Their only profitable division of their company in 2020 was their plastic production side. It wasn't necessarily energy use. It was the petrochemical division that was the only one that earned a profit, which is why you see companies like that leaning so hard into that. And they're hardly alone. I went down the list of like top 50 plastic producers, and it's most of it is petroleum companies and or petrochemical companies of some kind, right? Which I imagine they are freaking out about this EPR law.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
what do you think? How do we make sure? Because I know there's also some ambitious targets in that law about reduction,
Mm.
which is pretty cool too. Um, any thoughts on? I assume all these legislatures are aware of what's coming.
When you say what's coming, you just mean that more EPR laws are going to proliferate?
No, I think what I'm saying is what's coming in the sausage making and the onslaught
Mm.
of
Of the special interest.
bad mouthing the EPR by the oil companies. You know what I mean? Like this doesn't make sense. It's a waste. It's going to increase our that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
no, absolutely. I
You
mean,
think
I
people are
think
prepared for that?
no, I don't. I mean, I think one of the scariest things that we will be seeing um, from big oil, basically, is that they are transitioning their portfolios from fossil fuels for energy and infrastructure to petrochemicals.
Hmm.
When they get on shareholder calls, and I mean, you can find this publicly. Uh,
Yeah.
their leadership is explaining that they are beginning to make more of their profits from petrochemicals and plastics over fuel. So that is their strategic pivot. Um, and so there is new petrochemical infrastructure being built every day in this country, and of course there's going to be a holdover where, you know, if that infrastructure is built to last for 80 years, like we're stuck with it for a while. Like there's lag. We can't just
Mhm.
say on a dime like we're not going to do this anymore. And there are estimates from groups like Beyond Plastics that say that by 2030 the emissions from plastics will outweigh those from the coal industry. Like plastics have huge emissions associated with them. So my point there is you're absolutely right that that big oil is shifting to plastics, and
Mhm.
that's strategic on their part. If I were advising a big oil company, I'd say I'm not sure that that's your best pivot. I think you're much better off investing really heavily in more renewable energy projects, but they haven't hired me, and that's not my problem. In any case, I think that you're right that we also need to worry about the special interests in the bill. I think that we already see, I mean, at Atlantic, we see this every day where companies that create or sell plastic packaging like to make the argument of a lower carbon footprint than fiber. They like to talk about
Mhm.
how much lighter plastic is over paper, and therefore it's more efficient. And I mean, they're not wrong about those things. Like, don't misunderstand me. Like, there are extents to which those arguments are overblown, but they're right. There are trade-offs between using like paper-based uh, packaging and plastic. And so that is exactly why it's going to be really important with the way that the pro is set up, that the incentives are keep the eye on the ball. And the eye on the ball here is optimizing for higher recyclability and higher compostability. And if we do that, paper's going to win that argument. It just is. It's just so much easier to recycle that than all of the dozens of types of plastic that are out there. And when you start getting into the messiness of the flexible plastics and all that, it's just going to be really, really hard.
Mhm.
Maybe the plastics industry, if I again were advising them, maybe that's where they step a little bit more into opportunities in compostable plastics, where compostable plastics make sense, which is not everywhere. That could be a better strategy for them. But no, I mean, if I were beholden to the plastics industry right now, I would be scared by the EPR law.
Mhm.
And to me, as Caroline, Director of Sustainability at Atlantic, that's a great thing.
Mhm.
I'm very happy about that. Again, like there are times right now where plastic is is the material that makes the most sense to package something. Like for stretch wrap, we have no better alternative right now to secure a load of goods really, really well with very little material than stretch wrap. Um, and I think intelligent people will tell you that there are times when plastic is the best thing we have right now. I hope we innovate ourselves out of that, but for right now, that's what we have. So maybe the people in the plastics industry kind of need to lean into the places where that is our best option right now. But for places where there are obvious swaps, like, yeah, they should be afraid.
Yeah, and I mean, and even in those cases where the stretch wrap thing is sort of the best option on the table, it seems like, like I know Wes has said they're really investing in sort of closing that loop, right? So we have these
Mhm.
business to business. A lot of that is business to business shipping, and it's like, hey, take this stretch off and give it back to us because we will reuse this. We will,
Yep.
if they could keep it clean, that's not an easy thing to do. But when you consider how much of that packaging and that plastic wrap is used in business to business, it's really when it gets into the consumer's hands is when things get tricky, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in B2B, we have all kinds of opportunities to keep loops closed because we can keep material cleaner, and then there are reverse logistics already running where, for example, like our Atlantic trucks are already running to these companies and returning back empty. So we might as well fill them with stretch wrap that we can take back and turn into something else, often turn it back into stretch wrap. But you're exactly right. When it reaches the consumer's hands, it's really hard to collect it. We can't send it to MRFs because it clogs things up, so we have to rely on store drop-off programs. The material isn't as clean as we'd like it to be. It's all kinds of different plastic, and so it gets downcycled into like durable construction materials and things like that, rather than into new like shrink wrap or stretch wrap, because we just simply can't make it back into that. So yeah, the B2C side is where things get really messy with that plastic. Um, Again, I think that there will be opportunities to replace some flexible plastics with compostable plastics, especially when you're talking about food service applications and food packaging. That will not be a one size fits all solution by any means, but in some other places, we're going to have to get really creative about where can we use recyclable paper applications instead of plastic. Where can we eliminate packaging to begin with? I mean, we're gonna have to get really creative here, but I like to think about that as an opportunity rather than as a threat.
So one of maybe we could finish up on this one, but one of the most frustrating things for me as a I will just age myself as a Gen Xer, right? I'm old enough to remember the 70s anti-litter campaigns, right, that happened and really like the dawn of recycling. And I grew up I'm writing a blog post about this right now actually is, grew up the kid, number 5 kid of a depression era parents whose their whole thing was, you salvage anything you can. And so I remember
Yeah,
when the recycling thing first came to be, they're like, anything with the symbol goes in that can, anything. And that was pre-resin codes. You know what I mean? It was like it either had a symbol or it didn't. And so that was sort of my mindset. And I feel like, over the years, things have gotten so complicated and that the whole RIC system, which is the resin code, what does the RIC
resin
stand for again?
identification code. Yeah,
Yeah, the resin identification codes. Those things are so confusing. It's like having to know the periodic table or something.
yeah.
And so every time I go out to my side yard to figure out, it's like Jeopardy. I'm like, where does this go? Do you think we can, and then it varies even town to town what color your bin is and all this kind of stuff. So it's like,
Yeah.
are we going to be able to solve that in recycling 2.0? Can we please simplify? Um, Even if it means having more trash can or just labeling more, because you go to some other countries like Japan and stuff, and they're very good at the way they sort it. And you look at stuff,
Mhm.
and and they simplify it. And it just seems like we've muddled it up over here in the
No, no,
U.S.
you're absolutely right. I mean, I when people say that Americans and I guess other people are really bad at recycling, like I agree, but it's because it's incredibly confusing. I have a full-time job in this industry and I still have to parse out some of these nuances. It is very confusing, especially when you're talking about different kinds of plastics. The good news is, under the Recycling 2.0 scenario, I do think we see this get better. For example, in the Oregon EPR bill, I think there's a requirement by some year, which I can't remember right now, the entire state needs to have one system of like these are the accepted materials and these are not. It can't be different from town to town. It has to be like, here's the list of good, here's the list of bad. So that harmonization is going to be really critical for consumers to better understand what can go in the bin. I think the other thing that we're going to start to see more and more of, and this is separate from EPR, is I think we're going to see more FTC involvement about recyclability claims. We're already seeing a legal battle go down in California right now about brands that have been touting packaging as recyclable when that was kind of difficult to really claim is true. And so the FTC Green Guides have very specific criteria about what it means for something to be recyclable. And I think that organizations like the Sustainable Packaging Coalition and How to Recycle are doing a really good job trying to parse that out as well, in conjunction with groups like the Recycling Partnership and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So there are people working on this to actually say, like, okay, we need to make this much, much clearer. I will be curious to see what happens with resin identification codes as a result of that movement, because people see that like 3 chasing arrow symbol and, like, you assume that something is recyclable when all it means on a piece of plastic is this is what kind of plastic it is, which, like, your average consumer doesn't care about. They just want to know, can I put this in this bin or can't I?
Exactly.
One of the things I'm grateful for is that How to Recycle has developed the best system that we have right now for on-product labeling about whether something is widely recyclable, whether you need to check locally to see if it's recyclable, or whether you should just throw it away. And this is so much clearer than resin identification codes, because they do the work for you, because you don't care what number it is, you only care what bin to put it in. And that's what they're trying to do with the How to Recycle on package labeling, and that's super important. So I'm really glad to see that they've had so much success in getting brands to participate in How to Recycle labeling, because they really try to make it as clear to consumers as possible. But there's still a lot of consumers that don't know what How to Recycle is. They don't know to look for it on their package. So I think that there's still a lot of work to do on that. But you're right, resin identification codes did not help with the consumer confusion. And so when people say, well, so what number do I put in my bin? Then I have to say 1s, 2s, and sometimes 5s. Like,
Yeah.
that's
It's
hard
like,
for
yeah.
people to remember. They're like,
So it's impossible.
it's awful.
I honestly feel like, from the default perspective, I'm all, you know what? Somebody on the other end is going to figure it out. I don't know. And I became a wish cycler,
Right.
which is the worst kind of offender, because I'm like, when you wish cycle, you're the one killing the MRFs, because all of a sudden you're throwing polluted products or products that don't belong in there, and I'm like, oh. And when I realized what I had done, I'm just like, oh my God, I've spent years thinking I'm doing the right thing and doing the exact wrong thing. And so, yeah, it just needs to be simplified, and you need like this massive awareness campaign when we do get it. And this sort of bodes to the national bill, and hopefully we can get to that thing, because like what Oregon's doing. That sounds amazing. Imagine if we could do that across the country.
Yeah, it'd be amazing. I mean, what's going to be challenging is, simultaneously as there are efforts to kind of harmonize the messaging and the accepted materials, we're also seeing really exciting innovations in what we can recycle. We're able to recycle things that we didn't used to be able to. So, like, things are going to continue to change. And
Right.
unfortunately, as things have changed in the past, it has resulted in the loss of consumer confidence and trust in the system. And my
Right.
concern is that as we continue to innovate in recycling and make things better, that we will just continue to lose that consumer trust. So somehow we need to figure out how to both innovate and make things better while also providing clear messaging to consumers continuously about what they can and can't put in their bins.
Well, I feel like one of the opportunities with the New Earth Project, with getting a lot of these sort of celebrity outdoorsy people and that kind of stuff involved in this conversation and that kind of thing, is that when there's awareness campaigns that need to happen, we can leverage that kind of stuff. So look forward to sort of seeing where this goes, and it's an exciting time. You must be with bills like this, you must be pretty thrilled that you're just fresh out of Yale right at this time, because what an exciting time for you to get involved.
It's so exciting. I feel like there's finally energy behind this. I will say that a lot of times I have conversations with suppliers and customers that say like there's this whole new green thing that's going on and now we have to do this, and I kind of want to say like this is not new. Like we've been talking about this for a long time. I mean, again, seeing the video about landfills when I was a kid, like we've known that these problems existed. There's just finally enough pressure and momentum to actually get things moving. So it doesn't ultimately matter that they see it as a new thing, but it feels new to them. And I have to remember that it feels new to a lot of people. But we're not going to recycle our way out of our waste crisis, but we are going to need a combination of tools in our toolkit that's reducing the amount of packaging, designing for better recyclability and compostability, and then improving our recycling and composting systems along with consumer education. We have to do all of it at once. So it's a really exciting time to be in a circular economy profession for sure.
Awesome. Well, Caroline, thank you for letting me pick your brain again, and look forward to it next
Yeah.
week, hopefully. This has been great, and I'm having a lot of fun learning about this. And I think those people who, when they want to get involved and they could find stuff like this to dive into, it's great information. So thank you so much for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Always happy to talk through this stuff. Thanks for asking such great questions.